We spoke about this previewing the Golovkin versus Canelo Alvarez match, and it went the way we anticipated it would. So, what did you make of that fight?
Yeah. So, unfortunately, I think bout number 3 was not as glitzy and as flashy and as exciting as the first two. I don't know if that's just down to Golovkin being a bit slower and maybe to Canelo also being a bit tentative. I think in the back of their minds, they're like, it could be fireworks like the first two, and so let me be a bit more precautious. But, I mean, as we had predicted, Canelo pulled away, and it seemed like Triple G was saving his energy for the latter rounds, and he was a bit more conservative, which is not really what we come to expect of the fighter. But look, it was a good display from Canelo. Nothing really dominant, but good enough for him to win the rounds. Because I think by the time you were halfway through the fight, you were like, okay, if Canelo doesn't do something, if Triple G Golovkin doesn't do something now, he will need a knockout to try upset Canelo. So it was that kind of fight in terms of it wasn't that exciting, but I think it's close for it's almost about time for Golovkin to call time on his career, unless he thinks he's got a lot more in his arsenal. But for me, it didn't look like the vintage Golovkin, and I don't know if I still want to watch Golovkin just edge out fights, similar to what Manny Pacquiao said.
I was going to ask, like, how did you feel about when Pacquiao was very clearly past his prime and continued to fight, and is that something you'd want to see from Golovkin?
One, Golovkin is, I think, much older when he's doing that now. Because Pacquiao, when he was past his prime, he was still beating guys. But finally, when he called time in his career, I think when he was fighting Vargas, and he was like, this is the guy I should be beating. Yeah. And for the fact that I can't beat him, I know that it's just time. But he beat people like Keith Thurman, who is all right, I guess. He was good in his time, but I mean, now I don't think he's that good or that good a fighter. But I think Golovkin, because he's a power puncher and he's a guy who walks through the fire to get the job done, I don't see him doing that again over other better competitors. I mean, who else? Because in boxing, you are your own manager, essentially, and you get to pick your own fights. If he goes against the Charlo brothers, he might get destroyed. I know that's a big statement, but at his age now, and if you're going to walk through fire again, I don't think it's going to be good for him to continue fighting the way that he does now. So I think with Canelo, it was a good fight, well measured, did enough for what the fight required. But I don't think I want to see Golovkin.
So is it as simple as, because with Canelo is in the conversation pound for pound best in the world, right? Which is a different level.
Yeah.
So that's not a guy you beat on any given day.
True.
If you can't get past him, is it as simple as, okay, but then there are other fighters, there are other fights, given you are not at that level, but you might be on another level? Or do you feel someone like Golovkin, who's a champion and who is to be in those marquee fights against people like Canelo, if you can't get past him, that final boss, so to speak, give it up completely?
I think with the Triple G, the fight before he fought Canelo, he won by knockout, but it was not convincing fashion, typical of Golovkin. You look at that as one factor. Two, you look at the fact that he barely threw any punches in this third bout. He threw, I think, 50% less than he did in fight number 2. And yes, both fights were close, and they were, the one fight they thought Golovkin won, which was called a draw, and the second one that Canelo edged, they thought Golovkin was robbed. With this one, you're like, but where's your output? Because if you go down swinging, I mean, we know the whole Deontay Wilder thing where Fury is the better boxer, but we saw the fight in the man. And you're like, okay, if you meet adversity like this in other fights, we know what you've got to give. But with Golovkin, you just seemed happy to be motoring along and trying to win it in the 10th, 11th, and 12th, where you're like, okay, you don't have that stamina anymore. So where's your head in this? Are you still that elite in terms of your execution? Are you still that elite in terms of your mindset going to fight? So that is a bit worrying for me, because oftentimes when you see boxers afraid to throw, it's because they're afraid of what's going to come back. And if you're restricted like that, I feel that does hamper your game a lot. So I know that Canelo is God tier in terms of the division they're fighting in, but I don't want him struggling through other fights. I mean, I think it tarnishes his name. I think he might win a couple of other fights, but I think it tarnishes his name and then does build his reputation.